I think it's fair to start, not to keep you waiting any longer. My name is Justyna Janiszewska. I'm a director of the Fulbright Poland, and I have a pleasure to welcome you here for our third webinar of the series, The New Media Between Science and Fiction. And our today's topic is remote education, how to ensure effective K-12 online teaching. And our initial goal for this discussion, today's discussion, was what if the remote education is not a emergency option, but is just an option that people choose? How does it work? What if, for example, you have to leave your country because you got an award, a grant, or you're relocating for work, and you want to send your kid temporarily to an online school? What if your kid is a child with special needs and the school of your choice is an online one? But since we are in a very special time of the epidemics, we'll see how it works. I can bet that we cannot really skip the topic of the current situation that, for example, in Poland means that for most of the time, most of school children are in the homeschooling mode and are learning online. And to my best knowledge, this is also a situation in many other countries, including United States. So welcome to this discussion. I'm glad to see so many people already here, and I see more people joining. Let me also mention that this is our way to celebrate 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program globally. This program is present in Poland for over 60 years, but it was started in August of 1946. And therefore this year we are trying to celebrate the best we can online, mostly 75 years of achievements of the program, of our alumni. And I'm happy to see many of you here with us today. And especially I would like to welcome two of our wonderful speakers, Carrie and Jeannie, who are also Fulbright alumni. But I will leave the introduction of the speakers to our wonderful moderator, and I will leave for myself the pleasure of introducing Octavia Gojinska to you. I'm very grateful that Octavia agreed to run today's discussion. Octavia Gojinska is not a Fulbright alumna, but is a very accomplished person. She's a social innovator. She has her hands-on experience in
You just are
internet connection.
So many ways.
Yeah, I wonder when you lost me.
You said that Octavia was so experienced and then you freezed.
Well, I'm very sorry. This is the beauty of the internet. My older son is just having his English class and we're competing for the access to our internet. So Octavia has a hands-on experience in education. She was a headmaster and she led her school to many successes. And she was recognized for that, among others, by the Ashoka Association that you definitely recognize. She's also an alumna of the Leadership Academy for Poland, a very prominent program for social and economic and other leaders. That is, by the way, also built by the Fulbright alumnus. And I'm very happy that Octavia agreed to join this discussion, and I will shut up here and leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a great introduction and welcoming. And good afternoon to everybody, or good morning to our guests. And I'm really happy to be here with you and to conduct today's discussion devoted to remote education and how to ensure effective K-12 online teaching, as it was mentioned before. And here with us, there are two great guests, Carrie Rice and Jeannie Whitehouse. Carrie Rice is a professor and Fulbright alumna, and she is also the author of Making the Move to K-12 Online Teaching, Research-Based Strategies and Practices, second edition. And the next guest, Jeannie Whitehouse, is a professor, Fulbright alumna, and today in a role of mother of two teenage daughters who experience online schooling. This is a short introduction, but I would like to ask you, Carrie and Jeannie, would you like to add anything more about yourself? What are you working on at the moment? Where are you now?
You have to unmute yourself, Jeannie.
So Carrie, maybe you can
There
start?
we go.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it muted me. So my name is Jenny Whitehouse. I'm a multimedia journalism professor. I teach in a broadcasting program at Eastern Kentucky University. Think the Kentucky Derby, think Kentucky Fried Chicken, that's where I am, with chickens and horses. Would you like me to tell a little bit of my story right now?
Not your story, maybe about you. What are you? Where are you now? You said about Kentucky, but what are you working on at the moment? Maybe you can say about a little bit more about yourself.
I teach media ethics.
Okay.
I teach media ethics, and right now we're doing some research on documentary film ethics.
Thank you very much. And Carrie.
Oh yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this presentation. I have been involved in K-12 online learning and training K-12 online teachers since about 2006. So we've been doing this for quite a few years. My first edition of the book came out in 2011. We have a lot of information that we know about K-12 online learners and teaching and best practices that we can draw on to help us in this current situation. My research has been kind of across the board, looking at online programs, so program evaluation. I'm heavily involved in data mining research at the moment, looking at how online behaviors can predict student outcomes and whether we can change those outcomes with interventions. So that's just kind of a brief introduction.
Thank you very much. And our guests, Carrie and Jeannie, will guide us through the experience of remote learning from two different perspectives. I will ask about this researcher perspective and mother and professor as well. So even three perspectives. And I'm sure it can be valuable for us, especially at the moment when we are now at the time of pandemic and remote learning. First of all, I would like also to tell more about frameworks of our webinar. It will take 90 minutes, and I'm going to have discussion with our guests, and I would like to ask you participants to ask questions in the chat box, and I will try to implement them into our discussion as well. So there will also be time at the end of our meeting to ask further questions. There will be session of Q&A, so there is a lot of space for your questions, and please use our time and ask Carrie and Jeannie about their experience and their tips as well. And as it was mentioned before, we are at a special moment. This is something we call a new normal, very difficult time for everybody, for teachers, for parents, for students. And last year in March, we started our emergency teaching. The teachers were forced into new environments and different learning environments, something really, really new for them. They tried to deliver distant learning, they dealt with lack of digital skills, proper equipment, with there was lack of knowledge on how to conduct online teaching. But as we say, we did the best under circumstances we simply faced, which was not, of course, really easy. Following the research conducted by a group of Polish professors, researchers called Remote Teaching, we learned that 85% of Polish teachers hadn't used technology in the classroom before pandemic. This is fact. So you can imagine, we all can imagine how difficult it was to change, methods or to adjust methods and how to deliver simply education to our students. New normal has also brought problems with equal chances of students. There are many people who say about the gap between children and that this gap has widened. Many of children were excluded due to lack of access to the internet, lack of equipment as well, or simply not proper conditions at homes. It was really, and sometimes it is still a problem for many students. Moreover, Remote learning has been a big challenge for families. The parents have become teachers and often struggling with a combination of professional life, household duties, and children's homework. Today, a year since the pandemic closed schools, everybody is overwhelmed. Few teachers have found ways to adjust new methods and to deliver effective distant learning. The students are tired of watching computer screens and listening to teachers and doing homework. The parents want their children to be back in school. We all miss the face-to-face education and the spirit of community in classroom and in school. We simply lost it. So I think this is a good moment today to reflect on effective online teaching and to ask our guests, as I mentioned before, and to think on how good online teaching, what it can be, how it can be designed, and how we can do it better, and how to use our experience for the future. So let me start by asking Jeannie, who experienced online schooling of her teenage daughters, and this is that moment, Jeannie, for you to share your story. Could you share your story with us? And what was the reason for starting online education? How did it work? Please,
Well,
if you can share.
I am so excited to get to hear from Carrie, particularly on data mining and what we can do to make children have a great online experience. Because I am a terrible online teaching parent. I am awful at it. I am an excellent parent. Don't get me wrong. I always say I'm the fun mom who got to get her kids to eat vegetables, but I failed at potty training and I failed as being a homeschool online parent. I made mistakes from the very beginning. I was taking my girls with me to Bulgaria. I'm a single parent of 2 daughters. And we're going to go to Bulgaria for a semester. My oldest daughter at that time was a junior in high school, and my youngest was 13 and in middle school. And this seemed like a perfect time for a family international experience. And it was. Their time in Bulgaria really shaped them a great deal. But online schooling was not the successful part of the experience. Our school district here in Kentucky had said, hey, I know how you can do online school. We have this online school program and we have a contract and it won't cost you anything. And I was greatly attracted to it was free and we could set it up and it would be excellent. And it was free and we got what we paid for. Every lesson followed the exact same pattern, no matter what the subject was. We had this talking head, which is a language we use in broadcasting. An enthusiastic, very happy person was going to explain the material on a small video screen, and there would be an activity going on here. And then the student would respond to multiple choice quizzes. My girls hated this. They said in that teenage voice, this is stupid. Well, they were on their own during the day while I worked at Sophia University. And I would come back to our apartment at night and no schoolwork would be done. And I would start yelling. And my oldest said, you're making everyone miserable. So this is, So I said, in my voice, well, fine, I'm going to do one of your assignments. And you know your parents do this sometimes. So I sat down to do one of their assignments, and after 20 minutes, I said, in the exact same way they did, this is stupid. Now, at that point, I should have started looking for other solutions. But they were stubborn and they rejected everything that I suggested. And frankly, at that point, nothing else was really available. And so I completely gave up trying to force online school. And instead, we shifted gears and focused on just having a fun experience in Bulgaria. And they learned a lot, just not the school's learning objectives. And we ended up having to go back and actually, they went to summer school so they could actually get what they needed. And that was another experience. But what I learned as a failed online parent helped me a great deal later as an online professor when the pandemic came. I would love to hear about people who did a good job and this worked, and hear about what does work.
So thank you very much. So Kerry, how to do a good job online, how to teach in a good way, how to deliver quality of online teaching. What are key features? Can you share it? Can you tell us?
Well, I hope so. And I just want to say what an unfortunate experience. And I think number one, that your experience during that experience, how it influenced your online teaching is exactly one of the key elements that we try to get our teachers to do, is to take an online course so they can see exactly what their students are going to face. Most of us don't have that cultural experience. Our experience with school is very traditional. It's what we expect. And we tend to teach the way that we were taught. And so to have that kind of out of the box experience is really important for online teachers, number one. Number two, I would say, you know, I think the belief has been, for those that have not experienced online teaching and learning, that you can simply take materials from the face-to-face classroom and put them in a digital classroom the way they are, the way they exist, and expect the same results. And it's just simply not true. Number one, we have in the face-to-face classroom a captive audience. So it's really easy to keep kids, or to think that they're engaged, because they're captive. They can't leave. They're in the classroom. And when they're online, their distractions are just infinite. So it's looking at teaching and learning in a different way. It has to be. It's a transformation in how we think about how students learn best, how we present materials, and working on ways to keep kids engaged. And that includes, you know, things like learner-centered teaching, so focusing on kids' needs and interests, relevance, authenticity in assignments, using a lot of formative assessments to know where students are progressing, not using things like seat time for attendance. All of those elements kind of have to shift when we move online. And so that's probably one of the biggest takeaways, I think. And hiring or buying curriculum is okay, but it can't be the only element in the online classroom. There has to be teacher presence. We have to also look at how to support parents, right? So your story is, you know, a huge part of that is supporting parents. And one thing we've seen with online schools that have existed for, you know, 20 years or so, is a rethinking about the teacher-parent relationship, and even having teachers take on families versus grades or content areas. So it's just a different perspective on how to better support families and students. That's, you know, some of it.
Some of it, but sounds very complex, especially when you need to do it in emergency case and just now forced by situation. So maybe I will be back to Ginny. Ginny, you mentioned this experience, this Bulgarian experience with online teaching affected your teaching online. So what did you change? What was the biggest change for you?
Well, I think Carrie is absolutely right. The biggest change was realizing what the online experience was like. And I had been teaching online before, and I realized right away that just presenting material was not going to be enough. I've always used, well, at least for the last decade, have used a program called Prezi. And I don't know, have you guys Yes, I love Prezi because it does create the opportunity for a little more interaction with the material. And I thought that was enough. I thought if they were clicking through things, that counted as interactivity. And I realized with my children that the first thing was clicking a button doesn't count as interactive. Having a human connection somehow is interactive. And you ask a question and someone answers back. Now, ideally this should occur in real time, but it doesn't have to. I have used VoiceThread, which is really, and I know there are a lot of variations on this, where students make video recordings in response to questions, and then the teacher or other students can respond to statements inside the video itself, which is really great. Student makes a comment, I can respond right away, right there in the thing. And it creates kind of a dialogue. Now, this solves a couple of problems. Somebody was asking in the online questions in advance was the idea of how do we keep them from cheating? Well, getting them on video is a great way to create some accountability, but it also increases confidence. You hear what they're really thinking. You see the hesitations they have and the struggles. So these short, and I don't let them talk more than 5 minutes at a time. I don't want a 30-minute verbal process. I say they have to do 3 to 5 minutes tops, so they have to prepare a little bit. Another program that has worked really well is Perusall, which is an online textbook, and students do comments and questions in the margins. So if I'm not going to be doing a face-to-face synchronous class, and I do breakout groups constantly in synchronous classes where they are having to do some problem solving there, I can still create that interactivity asynchronously. That's the biggest thing I learned. I'll pass it back to you and I might add some more later.
Thank you very much. But Jeannie, would you like to share names of what you mentioned when you were talking about name of application, if I understood you well, Persuado or whatever? Can you share with us in a chat box?
I will. I'll put the link to both of these programs.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
VoiceThread is integrated with Blackboard and other online platforms. And Carrie probably knows so many more than I do. And Perusall is not as well integrated, but I'm particularly happy with VoiceThread. I'll put the links up now.
So if you can share names of tools, would be great. And Carrie, tools, this is one thing, but how about methods? How to boost students' engagement? Because it is, I think, crucial in our online teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to add one more tool to that. I love VoiceThread because it does have the audio and text. You can do both. Flipgrid is another that's well integrated in a lot of learning management systems that also now allows text and audio and video. So just that's the fun part of the tech is playing with the tools.
I'll throw the Flipgrid in there while I'm at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just talk based on what Ginny said about community. So in the online classroom, I think I was kind of getting at this before, community is such an integral part, creating community, building relationships. It has to be very intentional. And I think in the face-to-face classroom, it kind of happens naturally. I mean, we have activities that we do, but you're physically with someone, you tend to create community inherently. When you have a physical distance, there's the theory behind this called transactional distance. There's a geographic distance, but there's also a psychological distance. And the thinking goes that if you can close the psychological gap, the geographic gap doesn't really matter. And so it's really focusing on developing those communities. And we do that through things like active learning, active interaction between students and teachers, active interaction between students, and active interaction between students and the content. So there's kind of 3 different ways we can encourage and embed interaction into our lessons.
Carrie, can you say that again?
Transactional distance.
Those 3 things. Just go.
Oh, yeah.
Say it
Yeah,
again.
yeah. So it's interactions between students and teachers, interactions between students, and interactions between students and the content. So those three key elements are really important in maintaining a close psychological connection when you have a large geographical distance. So that's kind of the theory behind that. We also have a lot of we have standards, national standards in the US. You can find them, and I'll post this link as well.
Thank you.
The National Standards for Quality Online Teaching. They've been in existence since the mid 2000s. They've gone through 3 revisions, and they're based on research. They focus a lot on the strategies, types of instructional strategies that work good in online environments. So I'll save those or send the link for that. I think in typical online programs, there are very active communities of support. Like the infrastructure of an online program is a lot different than the infrastructure of a traditional school. And so there's supports for teachers, there's supports for students, there's supports for parents. And so that's really integral to the experience as well, to a quality experience. I'm trying to think of other things. Providing materials in multiple representations is really important. So using recorded video, but also using text or captioning is important so that you're addressing the different needs of students and how they learn best, and being familiar with tools that allow you to do that easily. So Flipgrid, VoiceThread, those kinds of tools. Padlet is a really good tool for linking and creating all kinds of interactive activities that doesn't require a lot of training for students, doesn't require student logins and passwords. Those kinds of tools are really important. Okay, I don't know if I answered the question.
This is very important. I think this is really great. So thank you very much.
Okay.
In Poland, for example, there was I would add also something to our discussion. There's a great project. Invite me to my lesson, or invite me to your lesson. Sorry, and teachers, visit different schools, different classes, groups of students, and to conduct lessons for them. So, for example, I can do it in different town, different school, on a topic which is chosen by other teacher. So this is also very helpful. I would like to ask one more question about support of for children in the context of social well-being. How parents can support their children? Ginny, how did you do it? Because your children, they lost in some way group of teenagers, and how did you do it? What was the solution, or how you did it? How you delivered the social context for them?
In my case, those two bonded like they had never bonded before. And what we did is got them out of the apartment as much as possible. And I know this sounds crazy, but man, I just let them go to the mall. They were happy there. It gave them, it was not as a reward, you do your home. I started off trying to do, you get a reward, you go to the mall. You know, you do your homework, you go to the mall. Forget it. Punishment. I have a confession to make. I was so angry about them not doing their schoolwork. I was this close to withholding food. And I realized, and they're both this skinny, and I realized that was the stupidest reward and punishment thing I ever came up with. So when I encouraged them to get out and outside and spend time just enjoying things, and I drug them around, and it was every church on every corner was a cultural experience for us. And so I think I should have also taken a little bit more of a Montessori approach of following the child and say, all right, let's just latch onto something you're interested in and taking it in there. But as far as the social goes, I felt so blessed that the one thing that came out of that experience is that they bonded as sisters, and they took risks as sisters, and they took responsibility for each other as sisters. And encouraging that responsibility, I think, was incredibly healthy.
Thank you very much. And Carrie, how about support for teachers? How to do it when we are, for example, there is principal of school, head teacher. How to help teachers to deal with new normal?
Yeah, so I do think that we need to make the distinction between what is happening now, remote, I call it a remote crisis response. So we've been thrown into this situation, nobody's really was prepared for it, versus like ironically traditional online programs, which have over time developed really good systems for support of their students and teachers. So that's really critical to see that. For support for teachers, I advocate, number one, to take all of the ancillary kind of responsibilities away from teachers and have them just focus on the teaching part of their jobs. So they shouldn't have to worry about truancy and attendance. Hire somebody to take care of that, to make the phone calls, to write the letters, to go visit the people. Teachers should not be responsible for that while they're trying to teach online. Somebody should be helping with curriculum development, so teachers aren't being forced to put all of their curriculum online on their own. That's a huge, I mean, that is a job in itself. We hire instructional designers to do that for online schools. So that's another aspect. And I'm not advocating to take power away from teachers in the curriculum that they teach, only to have support in developing the online portion of the curriculum. The other thing I advocate for is creating a hub of support in different aspects. So number one is creating ways for teachers to connect with each other through professional learning networks or some kind of centralized hub in the district, so they're not out trying to find things on their own. To create just-in-time training materials for teachers. So find somebody who can create recorded videos, tutorials for how to use, the tools that are most common in the district, so they don't have to go search for that, and place it in a central hub. And then use mentors and instructional coaches to help teachers implement some of the new technologies and strategies into their teaching. So I'm calling them responsive communities of support. It's like, we need it now, we need it here, and teachers need it when they need it. And don't focus on so much formalized PD and training. That can be part of it, but the most important thing is those just-in-time needs.
Can I ask a question, Carrie, tied to what you're doing? As a parent, really, the administrators got ugly with me when my kids, it was like, what's wrong with you that you can't make your kids do this? I mean, literally the response was, I said, I can't, she doesn't get it, and neither do I. And it was kind of like, well, I was like, I have a PhD, okay? But it's only in one thing, and it's not math. What successful parenting support tools have you seen?
Well, that's another aspect of this that's really challenging. It's because there isn't the system in place to figure out, they haven't figured out what online schools have figured out on how to support parents. So that has taken a lot of time and effort with online schools, because parents are such an integral part of the online learning experience. Number one is setting expectations. So letting parents know what the expectation is and what their responsibilities are as part of the triad. So you've got the school, the student, the teacher, the student, and the parent, basically. And so in the remote crisis response, I mean, there was no time to develop those strategies and supports. The easiest thing is to hold regular webinars and or recorded videos, or here's how best to support your child, or to provide the same kinds of supports for parents that they do for teachers. But honestly, it's more, I think, having a state of grace and try not to blame anybody for what is happening, and just get through it the best you can. So it's unfortunate that they weren't compassionate and empathetic to your situation and tried to find a way to respond.
Well, keep in mind that in my case, it wasn't during the pandemic. It was before the pandemic.
Oh, that's right.
And in my case also, it was kind of like the assumption of, well, we're doing you a favor. We've contracted with this curriculum provider. Now, my understanding was that there were going to be more supports. They hadn't paid for them.
Yeah, so there are so many different models out there of schools. So I think it's doing your research, like you said. Yeah, you didn't have time to do the research, and go out and look for a school that's better meets your needs as a parent. So the reasons that in normal circumstances that kids take online courses and programs are so varied. Some are credit recovery, some are traveling athletes, some are motivated and independent learners, but some are not. They need the extra support. So it's really it's really valuable to go out and look at the different types of schools and find a school that you think will best support your needs. And the best way to do that is to find schools that lay out in front of you what their expectations are of you, of the child, and then what you can expect from them.
That's huge.
It's huge. Yeah,
it is. And my next question is about parents, because as I mentioned before, they struggle problems. They face many problems at home. Combination of professional life, household duties, and children's homework, it is simply too much for them. And very often there is no even dialogue between, or there is no connection to community, to school community, to principal, to teachers. So is there any advice we can give our participants how to build good relations to parents, how to do it in a good way to help them to manage this difficult situation? Carrie, Ginny?
Yeah, so I think what I alluded to before is to be empathetic and have grace for what parents are going through. Everybody is going through a lot right now. So even like school administrators, they're going through a lot. Teachers are going through a lot. Parents are going through a lot. I have a son who has 2 young children, one in 2nd grade and the other in daycare, and he works full time. It's like trying to manage all of that is really, really challenging. I honestly, in this situation, there is no good answer except to be as supportive as you can and provide as much in the way of support materials. But I'm not sure that anybody has developed a normal set of expectations for what we're dealing with right now. If it was a traditional online school, yeah, those supports I think would be in place. The infrastructure would be there, but it's not. It's a different situation. So I'm not sure I can help with that.
Well, let me ask this then. What do you see? Okay, take it out. If you were advising me 2 years ago and I called you and I wish I had, and said, we're in Bulgaria, this isn't working, what should I be looking for? Now, you gave that great example of somebody who creates the support or outlines what the parent's responsibility and outlines what the child's responsibility are. What else should I be looking for? And what should the teachers be looking for? What should be created?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if it were me, I mean, I have the school in mind, but I'm not going to say it. But it would be a program that has a well-developed model for supporting those 3 elements. So the parent, the student, the teacher. It would be a program that has a very robust teacher professional development program. So they're not just hiring teachers to come in and teach adjunct or part-time. They have full-time on staff teachers. They have principals. They have a physical location somewhere, so they're not just selling content to school districts to push out. It would be a full-fledged program that I would look for. And in the case of international travel, it would have to be an international program that could cross across countries and still be relevant, I think. So one of the issues we have in the US is students in one state can't take classes from another state. So they typically have to take programs within their own state. So you probably, if you were going across country, could do a state level program from the state you reside in, which is what you did. But there are other more robust programs, international programs, that's all they do is teach online. I mean, they offer online programs. They have hire online teachers, all of that. So I would also make sure that they have a special education or special needs person. That's all they focus on, because it's a huge aspect of that's not usually well developed in online programs. It's getting more and more common, but we don't see a lot about how special needs are being addressed online. I would look for a program that had opportunities for social engagement between students, so field trips or experiential activities, those kinds of things. I would look for a program that was affiliated with major organizations like YMCA or libraries, or so that they can, or even like online clubs like math clubs or chess clubs. So they have a robust social aspect. That's really important for kids. And I would look for a program that has it's a rigorous progress reporting system. So you want something that is really tracking where kids are and has a way of sending out red flags or warnings when they're not staying on track.
The tracking program in the program that I used was basically just, they completed this unit. And that was all the tracking that was done. There was no, did they meet, did they pass the objective test or did they not? And oh, by the way, you were only given 2 chances to pass the objective test and there was no tutorial support. So that was bad. We knew that. I want to go back and ask about special needs programming. My oldest has profound social anxiety disorder. And it was assumed that she would not have problems with online learning because she has social anxiety disorder. There was no support. What should good support for special needs look like in an online program?
And so I would say, yeah, your daughter may have been a good candidate for an online program because of that, but maybe she wasn't. So the special needs supports, they should have the capability of doing therapies online. So speech therapies, hearing therapies, all those kinds of things. They should have some system in place for that, and either contract with an outside agency or work with a local district to provide those supports. They should have their special needs person should have contact with or be in a place where they're knowledgeable at the state level. So I'm thinking about connections with state directors of special needs and that kind of thing, so they stay on top of the requirements. They just really need to be knowledgeable. You can't have a teacher take on that role. So it has to be a special needs person to do that. They should be really familiar with how the IEP team functions in the online environment. So how are things communicated between the teacher and the parents, and how does that function? And so we see issues with that in supplemental programs. So those are programs that offer courses to districts and schools across the state. So the student is going to a brick and mortar school, but they may take one class from a supplemental program. And so we sometimes see issues with the communication between IEP teams and those supplemental programs. That doesn't always happen. But in a full-time virtual program, there should be a designated person who's taking care of that and following through on that.
So thank you very much. And there is a question from our participant. Jean, you mentioned interaction. So there is a question, how to persuade the kids to turn on their cameras? Some of them simply don't want to do it. If not, how can I be sure the kid is still there behind the screen?
Yeah, oh, sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
Well, no, yeah, I agree. That's an adventure and that's a challenge. And I, say, you got to turn your camera on. I have them switch. I control when they turn their camera on and off. So I give them a FaceTime break at different points. And well, it's easier with this is where it's easier with college kids than with a third grader. So I can say, all right, we're going to have our cameras on now, but during this portion while I'm lecturing, you could turn your cameras off. I give them a break rather than making them keep it on 100% of the time. What I'm more concerned about is them being engaged. I'm realizing now the guided notes process is an excellent way to go. I teach a very difficult course in media law, and perhaps the biggest change I made in that course was creating guided notes for students to fill in blanks during lecture portions, discussion questions. My kids' guided notes were, when they did readings, were basically doing a lot of definitions when they were in the classroom otherwise. I'm not talking about that kind of guided notes. I'm talking about a lot of different types of activity where their mind is engaged that is not repetitive. And if the only place they can get the information is during the online conversation, and then the proof of attendance is that they turn in that report, that has worked very well for me.
Terry, would you like to add something more?
I would. First, I think it's really important to understand where kids or students are coming from and not force the cameras on, because you don't know what the home situation is, and there can be some anxiety about sharing their home scenes with their peers. So be cognizant of that. There are ways to get around it. Like Ginny said, quickly turn on your camera and then you can turn it off. That's one way. The other thing I would suggest is that virtual lessons, live lessons that require students to be there with you at the same time should be used judiciously and only for interactions and engaging activities, not lecture. Lecture can be recorded. It can be recorded. Students can watch a lecture at their own time. And then when you hold the live lesson, you use that time for engagement and interaction, breakout rooms, discussions, annotated notes, whatever, guided notes, that kind of thing. But when learning moves online, there is so much more flexibility in how we use our time. So, and I anticipate when we go back to traditional classrooms that teachers have realized they've been recording their lessons or their lectures, they can use in-class activities for more hands-on activities. I'm not saying you should never lecture, but never lecture live, because there are times when that is needed. But for the most part, lectures should be recorded and shared asynchronously.
Thank you very much. And I would like to remind our participants, feel free to ask questions. Use our chat bot for writing them there. And another question, in Poland, there is discussion about educational loss. There is also pressure, there are exams. We need to get our students prepared to exams. And many teachers and parents, they are simply worried how to do it, how to check. When will we know that our students learned something, how to do it? Is there any advice for teachers how to check it, for parents not to be worried, how to deal with that problem? Carrie?
So yeah, so do you want me to take that? So I've been paying attention to this a lot. So learning loss and the widening of the achievement gap is, I think, going to be a substantial problem. I think everybody kind of agrees to that. I've read some people focusing on I would say this too, not placing the blame on the kids. This is something that happened to them. That they didn't do intentionally on purpose. So it's really important not to blame it on them. And even the language, like learning loss, kind of puts it on them, and try to be cognizant that it's not their fault. There's some studies out of Johns Hopkins on how remediation is makes false claims, and to rather focus on they're calling it acceleration. So instead of going back and trying to teach where the gaps are and only focus on those, to move forward with the curriculum with fewer targets, not dumbing down the targets, but lessen the targets. So lessen the breadth, more in depth, and let kids pick up the skills they need as they're moving through the content at their grade level. Don't put them back a grade. Don't try to remediate them into just focusing on those skills that they miss, but rather integrate that into the curriculum that is at their grade level and content area. That's one thing. The other was to really invest in tutoring. So that may be a place where resources can go to just heavily support students during the next year when they're trying to catch up with things they may have missed. And then I do have 2 tools. One is called Guru Navigator, and the other is Teach to One roadmaps that are free and allow you to assess where students are in content area skills like math and reading. So I can share those in the chat.
Thank you.
Can I ask Carrie a question about that?
Of course.
One is, I'm hearing some language about flipped classroom models that, of course, is an existing thing that involves face-to-face. What can we learn from the flipped classroom model that may be good for online?
So I would actually take a look at it the other way. What can we learn from online to help us with the flipped classroom? Because I kind of feel like that's where we're headed towards. It's blended or hybrid. The lesson is that anything that doesn't require hands-on inquiry activity can be offered asynchronously for anytime learning. So the idea is, instead of doing homework, like the active part of the math problems at home, do them in the classroom when you have the support of the teacher, but listen to the recorded lecture at home, or read the text at home before. It creates some issues if students don't do the work beforehand, because they need to do the reading or watch the lecture beforehand. So that can be a challenge. But that challenge can be overcome if the content is made relevant and authentic. So it's that idea of engaging kids and keeping them engaged in ways that makes them want to do the work. So I'm a huge proponent of project-based learning and inquiry-based learning, discovery learning, service learning, all of these things that we can bring into the classroom that make learning relevant to kids and they're not just completing worksheets and assignments.
One of the challenges I'm observing both in the classroom and with one of my kids who struggles in math is that with the pandemic, my bright students who can figure things out are getting better, and my kids who were always going to struggle are really struggling. And you mentioned tutoring. Is there a way, there has to be a way though, to address achievement gap in a way that doesn't make the kids who were already struggling at first feel dumb? How can we scaffold better?
So I think the blended or flipped classroom is the perfect solution to this, because in a blended classroom, the focus in the physical classroom is on usually on groups of kids. And so the idea is you're testing progress of your kids in all subject areas, and every kid is different. They're going to be moving at different paces and different things. And so if you don't single out one particular content area or skill, but everybody's working on something, they all have something they're working on, that's one solution. So it's not just singling out for remediation, sending them to a different room for special supports, but involving the whole class in those supports with the understanding that everybody needs to work on something all the time. So it's not just one single skill or one kid who's can't do his math. It's everybody working on whatever their needs are.
Thank you very much. And there are more questions from our participants. The first one, could you give us some tips which we could pass to our students on how they actually could focus on studying, how to cope with this feeling that they don't actually know when pandemic will finish, and force themselves to study?
I'm going to take that one first.
Stage is yours.
All right. Because this is pandemic fatigue. And I get pandemic fatigue. I think we're all feeling it. And similar to project-based learning, I think the best thing we can do is focus on increasing their energy and interest, so that it's okay, there's still cool stuff to learn, and there's exciting things and interesting things out there. Everybody's tired, so the focus can be on, hey, here's something new and cool. We all need something new and cool. And for me, I teach media ethics, and I'm happy to share this crazy exercise I did where there's a nuclear explosion and they have to figure out how to survive. And so we start with this application of a nuclear explosion and a survival team. And they have to do all these crazy things. And then I teach them about Thomas Hobbes and the state of nature, which is this boring, complex thing, but now they have the context for it. I think the best way is to do the crazy stuff or the weird stuff first, and then do the application. Traditionally, we tend to have a theory, then application. I'll tell you what the project is, and then I'll tell you the skills, and then you go apply it. And I think particularly during the pandemic, that doesn't work. I think we have to, if we engage them, we distract the crazy pandemic, we get them to care about what they're learning, and then we introduce the more complex material. Because if they understand the significance of it and they have something they care about, then they're going to be more patient. If we ask them to be patient and say, ooh, something interesting is coming, that's really not going to work online. Have a nuclear explosion at the beginning.
Thank you.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love it. It's so project based, like it's problem based, but project based. Yeah, perfect. I would also say we need to limit our learning targets. Like it's time to not have so many targets, to not worry about standardized testing. It is challenging for everybody, but especially for kids. I don't think we are really going to know the impact on kids for years, but I think it's going to be significant with the loss of, their friends and social activities and just their normal way of life. So, think about narrowing that focus on learning targets, providing more depth. And when you do that, it does allow you to be creative and project-based or problem-based in your learning activities.
Thank you. There was one more question. Carrie, how do you see the learning from COVID informing educational practice in the future?
That's something I'm actually really excited about, and I'm doing a keynote at the end of the month for Site on that. And I've been reading Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point again because I think, in my mind, that's where we are with the changes, the small changes that I think are going to happen as a result of the shift to remote teaching that will continue. And one of those, for example, was teachers recording lectures. So once you have those recorded, you don't need to give them live anymore. You can provide them anytime. And then your classroom becomes a transformed space. It's not just about you standing in front of the room at the center of the class, right? It's about distributed learning and being a facilitator and guide. I know it's cliche, but guide on the side kind of thing that they use in project-based learning. And I also think the increase in technology skills of teachers is going to have a huge impact. So just the being forced to bring in some kind of a learning management system or a centralized area for sharing of instructional materials is going to have a huge impact on the way the classroom structure works.
And Ginny, what biggest changes or even small changes have occurred in didactics in your work?
There. My biggest changes in my teaching, or
yes, in your teaching?
I think the biggest change is that really hitting home the application in theory and then how to do it, how to do project-based learning. Also how to do a flipped classroom. I had been familiar with these methods, and I'm trying out the Jigsaw method of where the students teach each other, and I'll put a link into that in just a minute. I think I've put together I did a 15-minute lecture where I on the nuclear explosion exercise, and I did it really well in 15 minutes. And I realized I don't need to spend 45 minutes on this lecture. And so that is figuring out that I don't have to do it the same way I've always done it.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, can online learning be effective? Is it possible to make it effective? Carrie, Ginny?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen successful online schools. We've had them in existence in the US for 20 years or more. So it's not making the assumption that you can just simply move content online and expect that kids are going to learn. It's the whole picture of a quality online program that needs to be effective. And we have, I would say in the US, we have 2% of our students, about 4 million students participate in fully online programs every year. That tends to stay pretty stable. But the blended space is really exploding, and I think will continue to grow. I mean, we don't have an option anymore, really. And what the one-to-one kind of putting technology in the hands of every kid has done is kind of forced the issue. And so, yeah, online can be done effectively. Absolutely.
Here is the challenge, though. I know this is a challenge also in Poland. We're going to have the infrastructural support to make it happen. We have, even in my own county, cold spots of where we don't have effective internet. And so I think that we need to consider internet access as important a thing as having a good road. And so infrastructure has to be there.
Thank you very much. And I would like to tell our participants that there is a space for asking our guests, and we can unmute you and you can talk to us. So if there is any volunteer, there is space. I would like to remind you or to tell you. There is still space for questions, and you can ask, not only write.
Oh, I see one. Could you describe step by step one
Yes.
random online lesson? I'll just describe a simple one I do, and it's in my introduction to K-12 online teaching class. So I'm trying to introduce teachers to some strategies by modeling strategies to demonstrate that you can collaborate online. And so we do a consensus building activity where they get into groups in a discussion board. They figure out how they're going to meet and when they're going to meet. They have flexibility in the time, the due date. So there's a 2-week span. And then they develop rules for online communications for their classrooms, basically. And then they share those out to the entire audience. So that's consensus building. I do Jigsaw activities where one group will work together and develop an outline of content or a summary of content and share that with another group. So there's just lots of different ways to engage students in collaboration and interaction. It's not always convenient, so you don't want to overuse it, but that's just one example.
Thank you very much.
Do you want me to do one, or do we have a different question?
There is another question, or maybe you want to add something. You would like to add something to?
Let me tell you what I did for my nuclear explosion. Basically, there's been a nuclear explosion. There are, you are the only survivors. One team has all of the weapons. One team has all the food and shelter, and one team has all the gold. You have to figure out how to have come up with a survival strategy, considering this getup. What do you negotiate? What are you willing to trade? What is your position of power? Students create a voice thread about that experience. And I've sent them, like on a Monday, I sent them that email. They have until Tuesday to do their voice thread, until Wednesday morning to reply to another student's voice thread. Then they get access to my online lecture, and I point them to specific readings in the text. Then they get from the lecture and those texts, they write a reflection paper. So they're engaged in they're interactive, they read, they watch, they reflect in that process over the course of a week.
How do you create the teams?
I've already actually broken them up in teams, and then I just give them randomly.
And then do they communicate through the learning management system or separately?
With voice, they put up their voice thread for their strategy, and then they comment on to each other saying, well, you haven't thought about this, or all the gold people want to melt out their gold into guns every time. And so the weapons people say, no, 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 you can't do that. The shelter people offer all sorts of creative things. You go from there. So they're communicating with each other through the voice thread.
Right. Thank you very much. And one more question: how to deal with or prevent cheating during online tests?
Oh, we get this a lot. And my response is always quit giving online tests.
What do you do? Project-based only?
Yeah, I haven't given a test in 20 years. So it's when if you're asking for rote memorization responses, that's not an effective way to assess online because you can Google it. So it's getting to know your students, creating opportunities for formative assessment, self-evaluation, progress, watching progress, tracking, and getting kids involved in that as well. So making it part of their responsibility to track their progress and learning. It's focusing more on competencies and understanding complex constructs versus remote or rote memorization, and offering ways of demonstrating learning beyond tests. So projects, right? Developing projects, videos, anything other than, multiple choice tests.
you can't do a multiple choice test.
How about open book? Does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So make the questions complex enough that there has to be some thinking involved. But then you do have the, you know, that also brings with it a sense of, are the parents helping or somebody else helping with that? So it's really getting to know your kids and making it engaging for them to demonstrate what they've learned, so that it's not just a simple rote test.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Well, Lucinia talks about presentations. Those are also good. This is again
Yeah.
why any video is good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, short ones.
There are even options with you mentioned Padlet, but there is also Wakelet, very popular nowadays in Poland. So students also use it.
Wakelet.
Wakelet is really,
yeah, it's
I
good.
really like it too. Yeah. So thank you very much. And we are coming to the end of our webinar, and thanks a lot for all your contributions. And they are very constructive, in my opinion, very useful and valuable. But I would like to ask you for the last recommendations, guidelines concerning effective education online. Carrie, would you give us the last recommendations?
So I shared a link to a shared Google document that has some links and resources. And that first link is an infographic I created on best practice recommendations. So I'll just kind of review that. I don't need to share it. You guys can look at it yourself. So number one is being very intentional on making connections. So in the online space, it's really important that you spend time getting to know students and their families, not just the students. So the family is very important. And I go through a process in my class where we create an interview tool. But I also recommend, there should be pretty consistent communications between the teacher and the families. Establishing a central communication hub for back and forth, so that you have a consistent feedback loop or communication hub between teachers, administrators, parents. Offering personalization. So making sure that you're taking advantage of the flexibility in time, pace, place, and path of learning. When it moves online, you have all of that flexibility. And then how can you use that to your best advantage? Using a lot of constructive feedback for kids, focusing on mastery, not seat time. So that's something we didn't talk about. So when learning moves online, we no longer need to use seat time as a measure of learning, which is what we do in traditional classes. Instead, the focus can be on the learning itself, or progress in learning, and the time is flexible. And so our goal should be getting every kid to mastery, whatever that takes, instead of relying on time as a measure of learning. The third thing is interaction. So making sure that you have multiple ways for kids to interact with you as a teacher, with their peers, and with the content in the curriculum. Consistency, we found, is the biggest predictor of success, and that's through data mining. We've just determined that. So that means consistency in how often kids log in or attend. So attendance is really important then for younger kids. And engagement is really important. So you've got to find ways to make sure those kids are logging in every day. And it's just establishing routines. And consistency is more important than the amount of time they spend in the learning management system. So that was a huge finding for us. Use student expertise to help with the interaction. Use social forums. Use, whatever way you can to get them invested. And then for programs themselves, it's the infrastructure. So it's making sure that you have you're allocating resources to support teachers, students, and families. So hiring people to take care of things like attendance, even grading. The grading process online can be really time intensive because you're not doing multiple choice tests all the time, and worksheets aren't, always the best option. Use digital tools anytime you can, like quizzes or Kahoots, or there's a lot of interactive assessment tools. Edpuzzle, Nearpod, Pear Deck, all of those kinds of tools that create interactions and allow for formative assessment that's integrated into the learning are good tools to use. States, countries are going to have to look at probably reassessing their policy and funding processes because when kids start moving outside of traditional schools to online, the funding is going to shift. And what does that look like? It may have very significant effects on our policies. And let me see. Provide supports for teachers, PD, instructional coaches, just-in-time learning materials.
Thank you very much. A lot
Sure.
of very
It's a lot. It's on the infographic, so that's why I created it.
Thank you very much. And Jeannie, any suggestions for us?
The best thing I ever did was shift my focus as a journalism professor to, instead of ABC grades, to publishability. And yes. And so, I mean, everything about it is, can it go on air? Is it publishable? And it changed the way students thought about their writing. And instead of, I want, a B or a C is good enough, as, could this be published, or will this be published? And so I think that translates in a lot of different forms.
I would second that. That's fabulous. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is really great to learn from you and to listen to what you share with us. Your experience is really great and from different perspectives, but I think very useful, very practical, and I'm sure everybody can take at least something for herself or himself. So thanks a lot for being today with us, and I hope we will see in the future. And thanks a lot for this meeting.